In the heart of Brooklyn, a wealthy man named John Anderson faced the harsh truth his children cared more about his fortune than his life. Diagnosed with terminal cancer, he set out on a bold experiment to test the character of strangers. One small act of kindness would soon rewrite the fate of his entire empire, proving that true wealth is measured not in money, but in humanity. John Anderson sat in the corner office of his Manhattan penthouse, looking out over the city that had been both his playground and his battlefield for decades. The skyline stretched endlessly, towers of glass and steel gleaming in the late afternoon sun, a testament to his ambition, his strategy, and the immense fortune he had built from the ground up. But today, none of it mattered. The numbers on his bank statements, the quarterly reports, the accolades that lined the walls, they all felt hollow. For the first time, John realized that wealth had never been enough to guarantee the one thing he wanted most: genuine human connection. The people closest to him, the ones he had expected to cherish his life and his legacy, were nothing more than opportunists. His children, Marcus and Laura, had always been polite, even affectionate in public, but the truth had become undeniable. They cared only about control, ownership, and inheritance. They saw him as a ledger, a means to an end, not a father to be loved or a man to be valued. It was a shocking clarity, one that had arrived brutally in the form of a medical diagnosis: terminal cancer, stage 4. Doctors had told him in calm, measured tones that his days were numbered, that no treatment could reverse the trajectory. Months, not years. The conversation had been clinical, almost detached, but the words carved themselves into John's mind with an intensity that no corporate loss ever had. He left the hospital with a folder of papers and prescriptions, but the weight in his chest was heavier than any briefcase of legal contracts. The reality of mortality had a strange way of stripping everything else away, and suddenly the empire he had spent a lifetime building seemed like a fragile illusion. John's mind raced as he considered his children. Marcus, always the sharp negotiator, the one who had learned to read boardrooms like a book, had immediately inquired about controlling shares, voting rights, and succession plans. Laura, poised and charming, had asked pointed questions about trusts and asset protection, her voice calm but her eyes betraying calculation. Neither had asked if he was scared, or what he hoped for in his remaining time. Neither had wondered how he wanted to be remembered, or if his life had any meaning beyond the balance sheets. Their priorities were clear. They wanted inheritance and nothing more. The realization left a bitter taste in John's mouth. He had loved them, had invested in their upbringing, had provided opportunities that no child in their circles could imagine. Yet love and generosity had been met with entitlement and expectation. The clarity of his situation ignited a dangerous idea in John's mind. If blood could not be trusted to carry forward a legacy of humanity, then character must be the only criterion worth recognizing. He envisioned an experiment, one that would strip him of every advantage he had ever known and place him in the world as a man without name, without status, without recognition. It was a test that no corporate training, no inheritance planning, no legal strategy could simulate. He would see firsthand whether true human kindness existed outside of boardrooms and wealth, and if so, who embodied it. Preparation for this radical decision was meticulous. John sold his high-end suits, leaving only worn jackets and thrift store shirts to cloak his identity. He traded his luxury car for a battered sedan and removed every trace of the lifestyle that screamed influence and privilege. For the first time in decades, he would not be recognized as John Anderson, Billionaire. He would be another man in need, blending into the margins of the city. The transition felt almost surreal, like stepping into a parallel reality where the rules he had mastered no longer applied. Everywhere he looked, the trappings of wealth seemed meaningless. The respect and courtesy he had commanded for years dissolved the moment his title and money disappeared. The experiment began in Midtown, where luxury hotels had long welcomed him with open arms and reserved floors. But now, carrying nothing but a small backpack, John was turned away at the front desk, dismissed politely but firmly. At fine dining establishments, he was escorted out with barely a glance. Security guards ushered him into the rain, muttering apologies as patrons pretended not to see. In every polished, gleaming space where money usually opened doors, he was invisible or unwelcome. It was sobering, demoralizing, and yet profoundly instructive. He had known the world could be cruel, but the consistency of the rejection, the casual indifference, was a lesson he had never experienced behind glass office walls. Days passed in this manner. John wandered through neighborhoods he had once overlooked, seeking anyone who might offer human decency without expectation of reward. He observed the way people treated each other in small cafes, corner stores, and public transport. Some acted out of impatience, some ignored his presence entirely, but the pattern was unmistakable. Humanity was often conditional, measured against what someone could give or provide in return. And yet, somewhere beyond the polished avenues and high-rise towers there was still hope. John sensed it, waiting to be found. Then, one rainy evening, he stepped into a small diner in Brooklyn, the kind of place with flickering fluorescent lights, grease-stained floors, and the comforting scent of soup and fresh bread. Inside, Emily Davis moved with quiet efficiency, wiping down counters, refilling coffee cups, and greeting each customer with warmth despite the exhaustion visible in her posture. She noticed John immediately, not because of his demeanor or clothing, but because she saw a human being in need. The manager, annoyed by the sight of another disheveled man lingering near a booth, prepared to ask him to leave. But Emily intervened instinctively, offering a seat by the heater and a bowl of soup on her own tab. She did not flinch at his appearance, nor did she perform kindness for recognition or reward. She simply acted as a person should, giving dignity to another human being. It was in that moment, amidst the hum of the diner and the patter of rain against the windows, that John realized the full weight of what he had been searching for. The empathy and decency Emily displayed were priceless, worth more than any portfolio or asset he had ever amassed. Her actions crystallized the truth he had long suspected, but had never confronted. Legacy is not a matter of inheritance. It is a matter of character. Money could be passed down, titles could be inherited, but the essence of a person, the capacity for kindness, integrity, and selflessness was earned, not bought. John left the diner that night with a new certainty. He had found what he needed, not in his bloodline, but in a stranger who acted rightly without expectation. For the first time in months, he felt a clarity that no meeting, no deal, no corporate victory had ever given him. This was the foundation upon which he would build his final act, ensuring that his fortune, and the empire he had created, would rest in the hands of someone who truly deserved it. The realization was liberating and terrifying all at once. The streets of New York stretched before him, rainy and illuminated by streetlights reflecting off slick pavement. John walked with purpose, knowing the next steps would be both legally complex and morally audacious. He had discovered the value of character and the fragility of blood ties, and he intended to honor that discovery in the most profound way possible. The world of wealth, power, and inheritance would never be the same once his decision was made. And he carried that weight with both resolve and anticipation. For John Anderson, the true test of his life had just begun, and it would hinge not on money, but on the simple, transformative power of human decency. John Anderson sat back in the sterile white chair of the oncology office, trying to focus on the doctor's words but failing. The room was quiet, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above punctuating every pause. The words hit him harder than any boardroom defeat ever could. Stage 4 cancer. Terminal, months, not years. The doctor's calm, measured tone made it feel clinical, almost like a financial report being read aloud. Yet John could feel every word cutting into him with terrifying precision. For decades, he had measured his life in acquisitions, mergers, and returns on investment, yet no amount of wealth could alter this outcome. Mortality didn't negotiate. Mortality didn't care about net worth. It didn't matter how many luxury cars he owned, how many skyscrapers bore his name, or how many influential friends he could call at any hour. The drive back to his penthouse was a blur. Rain-slicked streets reflected the neon signs and the occasional headlights of passing cars, turning the city into a distorted mirror of the life he thought he controlled. His mind raced through every interaction he had ever had with his children, Marcus and Laura. The memories weren't warm. Marcus, ever precise and analytical, had always asked about stock performance, board control, and succession planning. Laura, polished and graceful, had inquired about trusts and tax strategies. Neither had asked how he was feeling. Neither had asked what he wanted from the remainder of his life. Their concern had always been calculated, practical, and devoid of emotional depth. John had thought that love could coexist with ambition, that family could be both affectionate and strategic. The diagnosis shattered that illusion. He realized with painful clarity that his children were not prepared to honor the human being he was. They were ready only to claim the empire he had built. That night, John wandered through his penthouse, passing walls adorned with awards, photographs, and art pieces he had spent years collecting. Each item, once a symbol of achievement, now seemed meaningless. He thought of the countless hours he had spent negotiating deals, acquiring companies, and defending his empire against competitors. For what? To leave it behind to people who saw him only as a source of leverage. To see everything he had built transformed into power for those who never understood the weight of responsibility. The realization was suffocating. His wealth, his name, his influence, all of it felt irrelevant when compared to the absence of genuine human connection. As he sat in the quiet of his office, John's thoughts turned inward. He wondered how he had missed it for so long, how he had surrounded himself with people who nodded, smiled, and agreed, yet whose loyalty was always conditional. In the corporate world, he had always thrived on strategy, manipulation, and calculated risk. But in the personal realm, he had failed. He had assumed that family was instinctively aligned with love and gratitude, but the diagnosis proved otherwise. His life had been rich in assets but poor in trust. This bitter truth ignited in him a radical idea: if family could not be trusted to uphold the values he held dear, perhaps someone outside of his bloodline could. Perhaps character could be the only true measure of worth. The next few days were a blur of planning, reflection, and preparation. John reviewed his estate, mentally tallying the ways in which his assets could be redirected. The safeguards needed to ensure they would reach someone worthy. He considered employees he respected, friends who had shown integrity, even strangers who had caught his attention through random acts of decency. But the problem was scale. He needed a method, a test, a way to separate those who would act out of genuine character from those who would act out of self-interest. He realized that he could not rely on chance or casual observation. He would need to immerse himself in the world as someone without wealth, without influence, without identity. Only then could he observe character in its purest form. That idea, though, terrified him. The very thought of abandoning the protections his wealth afforded him, of stepping into the streets of New York as an ordinary, unrecognized man, was both exhilarating and frightening. He had built a life around security, control, and predictability. Every move was calculated, every relationship leveraged. Now he would be vulnerable. He would be exposed to rejection, humiliation, and danger. Yet vulnerability was exactly what he needed to witness humanity at its rawest. John understood that this journey would not be about him surviving, it would be about him observing, testing, and ultimately judging character without the influence of money or title. He began to prepare. He shed his high-end suits and tailored shoes, replacing them with worn jackets, inexpensive pants, and shoes that had long lost their polish. He canceled chauffeurs, sold his luxury car, and stocked only minimal cash in a plain wallet. He instructed his legal team to monitor his health discreetly, ensuring that if something went wrong, medical assistance would be available without exposing his identity. Every detail had to be meticulously managed, because even in anonymity, he could not afford a misstep. His fortune could still be endangered by oversight or legal loopholes. In the quiet of his penthouse one evening, John reflected on what he hoped to find. He wasn't searching for loyalty, applause, or gratitude. He was searching for humanity. He wanted to see people act rightly without incentive, to witness compassion in its purest form. He wanted to understand whether decency could exist in a world conditioned to respond only to status and wealth. And deep down, he hoped that by finding someone who embodied those qualities, he could entrust the empire he had built not to blood, but to character. The more John considered the possibilities, the more urgent the experiment became. Every interaction he had with Marcus and Laura reinforced the necessity of his plan. Their questions, always pointed and self-serving, reminded him that his children would never grasp the significance of kindness or responsibility. They saw assets, shares, and influence, not the human being who had accumulated them through decades of effort, vision, and sacrifice. He had spent a lifetime teaching them how to succeed in business, yet he had never taught them how to act rightly when success was guaranteed. It was a bitter irony that in trying to secure their future, he had left them unprepared for moral responsibility. By the end of the week, John had resolved to take action immediately. He would step into the streets, into diners, grocery stores, and neighborhoods, presenting himself as a man without fortune. He would observe behavior, weigh choices, and test humanity in ways that money had never allowed. This experiment would define the final months of his life. It would determine whether his wealth could be placed in the hands of someone deserving, whether his legacy could reflect the values he had always professed but never fully verified. As he looked out at the skyline from his office, John felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The city, once a symbol of his control, now represented a proving ground, a stage upon which the truest elements of character could be revealed. John's reflection left him exhausted but resolute. Terminal as his diagnosis was, he felt more alive than he had in years. Death had stripped away pretense, exposing what mattered most. The coming weeks would test him, the strangers around him, and the very nature of morality in a society dominated by wealth and status. For John Anderson, this diagnosis was not merely a sentence, it was an opportunity to witness humanity in its rawest, most revealing form, and to ensure that his empire, in the end, would belong to the one who deserved it most. John Anderson stepped out of his penthouse for the first time not as a billionaire, but as a man stripped of privilege. The rain fell steadily on the streets of Manhattan, soaking the worn jacket he had purchased from a thrift store and dripping onto shoes that had long lost their polish. He walked with careful intent, observing the city with eyes he hadn't used in decades, not as a conqueror of business deals, but as an outsider trying to measure human behavior in its rawest form. The bustling sidewalks, the yellow taxis, the street performers, all were the same yet entirely different now. He belonged to none of it. The invisible barrier that his wealth had always created was gone, and the reactions he received from the world reflected it immediately. His first attempt at ordinary interactions was at a mid-tone cafe he had frequented in better days. He approached the counter with a tentative smile, hoping to order a simple coffee. The barista glanced at him briefly, then returned to texting on her phone. "Sorry, we're closing in 5 minutes," she said without looking up. John handed over a few coins, but she waved them away and gestured him toward the door. In that moment, he felt a sting he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't humiliation or anger, it was the recognition of how dependent his previous life had been on external validation. The world treated him as he now appeared, not as he had been. For the first time, he understood the cold efficiency of social hierarchy outside his boardroom. Money had been his shield, and now, without it, the city regarded him as invisible, disposable, and unworthy. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Luxury hotels denied him entry when he tried to ask for a room, citing maintenance or full occupancy. Restaurants that had once rolled out the red carpet now considered him a nuisance. Security guards guided him to the streets with polite but firm words. At times he was ignored entirely, walking past indifferent crowds who avoided making eye contact. The experience was exhausting, but it was also instructive. John took meticulous mental notes, cataloging behaviors, attitudes, and patterns. He realized that most people's compassion was conditional, often measured by appearance, status, or potential gain. Generosity was transactional, and human decency was often hidden beneath convenience and self-interest. Despite the repeated rejections, John refused to give up. He wandered into neighborhoods less familiar, seeking spaces where wealth had no influence, hoping to find those rare glimpses of genuine humanity. In small delis, corner stores, and subway stations, he observed people offering help, a seat, or a smile to strangers, not because they would gain anything, but because it was the right thing to do. These moments were fleeting, often almost imperceptible, but they left a lasting impression on him. He realized that while the world could be cold, warmth existed in pockets, and those moments of kindness were worth more than all the power his empire had afforded him. It was during one particularly rainy evening, after hours of wandering through Brooklyn, that John stumbled into a small diner tucked between a laundromat and a newsstand. The lights flickered overhead, and the scent of soup and freshly baked bread filled the air. He hung his wet coat on a hook by the door and scanned the room. Most customers were lost in their own worlds, hunched over coffee cups or newspapers. A manager, noticing him loitering near the counter, started to move toward him with the intent of asking him to leave. But before the words could be spoken, a young woman appeared. Emily Davis, the diner's sole waitress at the moment, approached him with a warm smile and a tray of soup in hand. She didn't ask questions. She didn't judge his worn clothes or damp hair. She simply gestured to a seat by the heater and placed the tray in front of him. John was taken aback. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who calculated every interaction, who measured kindness against potential benefit. Emily's actions were simple, instinctive, and unselfish. She poured coffee refills without complaint, asked if he needed more bread, and made small talk about his comfort, never expecting thanks or recognition. Every gesture was an affirmation of his worth as a human being, not as a client, investor, or employee. The impact of her decency was immediate and profound. John realized that he had spent decades chasing validation in the wrong places. Wealth, power, and influence had never offered him what he was experiencing now: unearned respect, dignity, and recognition. The encounter with Emily sparked a series of reflections that John had tried to ignore. He thought about his children, the way they had reacted to his diagnosis, and the absence of empathy in their behavior. He realized that legacy was not something that could be passed down automatically through bloodlines. Character was not inherited. True human goodness could not be bought, manipulated, or coerced. It was earned, demonstrated, and recognized in moments when no one was watching. This diner, this small act of kindness, had provided more clarity than decades of meetings, contracts, or boardroom speeches. It was the insight he had been searching for, the measure of humanity that he could finally trust. John left the diner that night with renewed purpose. The city, once a symbol of his dominion, was now a testing ground. He would continue to immerse himself in spaces where his wealth was irrelevant, observing people, weighing character, and documenting acts of unselfishness. Each encounter, each rejection, and each display of kindness added layers to his understanding of human behavior. He began to see patterns not just in actions, but in intention. He noted who acted rightly when nothing was to be gained, who helped others at personal cost, and who treated people with respect even when it was inconvenient. Over the following weeks, John's journey continued across New York. He visited subway stations, low-income neighborhoods, and public parks. He saw the struggles of everyday life, people coping with hardship, juggling jobs, and making sacrifices for loved ones. Yet within these ordinary interactions, he discovered extraordinary generosity, empathy, and courage. The contrast between the coldness of wealth-driven spaces and the warmth of these human moments was striking. John realized that these observations would form the foundation of his final decision regarding the empire he would leave behind. By the time he returned to his penthouse after weeks of immersion, John's perception of the world had shifted dramatically. He no longer saw his fortune as a measure of his success. He saw it as a tool that could be used to foster goodness, protect integrity, and empower those who deserved it most. He understood that the true test of his wealth would not be in the hands of his children, who had proven themselves unworthy, but in someone like Emily, who had acted rightly without expectation, without recognition, and without self-interest. The experiment had achieved its purpose. It had revealed the rare and invaluable presence of human decency, the kind that could carry forward a legacy not in dollars, but in humanity. After weeks of moving anonymously through New York, John Anderson found himself returning to the small Brooklyn diner more often than he had planned. Rain or shine, he would take a seat by the heater and watch Emily Davis work. She moved through the room with a natural grace, carrying trays of soup and coffee, tending to customers who were sometimes impatient, rude, or indifferent. Every gesture she made was deliberate yet effortless, as if kindness was an intrinsic part of her being rather than a performance for approval or recognition. John observed how she spoke to the regulars, how she noticed small details about their lives, and how she never judged or dismissed anyone, regardless of how messy their circumstances appeared. The more he watched, the more he realized that her character was extraordinary, yet entirely unassuming. John began to reflect on the contrast between Emily's world and his own. In boardrooms, every compliment had a purpose, every smile was a strategy, and every act of generosity came with an expectation. People's motivations were constantly measured, and loyalty was bought, bargained for, or coerced. Yet here was Emily offering humanity in its purest form, without calculation or self-interest. She didn't perform for applause. She didn't keep score. Her actions were grounded in empathy and responsibility, the kind of values that John had long wished to see in the world he had built, but rarely encountered in his own family or among his associates. Her existence was a revelation, a living proof that true decency could still thrive even in a society dominated by wealth and ambition. The first time John truly spoke to Emily, it was by accident. He had been fumbling with a crumpled $5 bill in his pocket, considering offering it as a tip. It was a paltry sum by any standard, but it represented more than money. It was a gesture, a test of human generosity that he had employed countless times in his experiment. Emily noticed him struggling, tilted her head slightly, and said with a soft smile, "You don't have to do that. Guests don't pay for kindness." The words struck him with unexpected force. It was a simple statement, yet it carried a weight far greater than any negotiation, any contract, or any boardroom declaration he had ever encountered. In that moment, John realized that Emily's humanity was not transactional. Her actions weren't dictated by reward or recognition. They were guided by an internal moral compass, steady and unwavering. As the days went on, John found himself engaging in more extended conversations with her. He learned about her life, the challenges of raising a young daughter on a modest income, and the small victories she celebrated in a world that often seemed indifferent. Emily spoke with honesty, without complaint, and with a sense of resilience that left a deep impression on him. She did not frame her struggles as grievances to be exploited or opportunities for sympathy. She treated them as facts, as responsibilities she met with courage and commitment. John began to recognize that the same principles that guided her actions in the diner would guide her in any situation of power or responsibility, if ever she were to encounter it. John's admiration for Emily grew beyond mere observation. He began to see her as a reflection of the values he wished to see perpetuated in the world. She embodied integrity, selflessness, and accountability in ways that his own children, Marcus and Laura, had never approached. Their interactions with him had always been calculated, motivated by inheritance and control. They were sharp, strategic, and ambitious, but lacking the empathy and moral courage that defined Emily. Every conversation he overheard between Emily and her customers reinforced this contrast. She treated everyone with respect, no matter how small or insignificant they appeared. She extended grace without expectation, and she acted with responsibility without being prompted. The realization that he had found someone who could be entrusted with his empire was both exhilarating and daunting. John considered the implications carefully. Leaving his fortune to a stranger, someone entirely unknown to the world of wealth and influence he had occupied for decades, was a radical decision. It would undoubtedly provoke outrage, resistance, and legal challenges from his children. Marcus would react with anger, seeing only lost opportunity. Laura would respond with manipulation, seeking to reclaim control through subtle intimidation. Yet John's conviction deepened with each passing day. He understood that wealth without character was dangerous, but wealth guided by integrity could change lives, protect the vulnerable, and honor the values he held dear. John also reflected on his own transformation. Observing Emily had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He no longer viewed every interaction as a negotiation, every person's a potential asset or liability. He began to appreciate the subtleties of human behavior, the quiet sacrifices, the acts of decency performed without recognition. His definition of success shifted. He understood that true legacy was not measured in skyscrapers or stock portfolios, but in the capacity to act rightly and inspire goodness in others. Emily's example made him realize that the greatest inheritance he could leave was not money alone, but the opportunity to continue a legacy of humanity and empathy. The bond that formed between them, though subtle and unspoken, was rooted in mutual respect and recognition. John never revealed his true identity, yet he felt a growing sense of responsibility toward her. Emily had no knowledge of the experiment he had undertaken or the wealth he controlled. She acted as she always had, with dignity and decency, and that consistency made her character all the more remarkable in John's eyes. Every day he observed her, every interaction he shared, reaffirmed his belief that she was uniquely suited to embody the values that his empire should reflect. John's decision solidified in quiet moments. He imagined the consequences of entrusting his fortune to Emily rather than his children. The likely uproar, the media frenzy, the legal battles, all of it was anticipated and accounted for in his mind. Yet none of that diminished his resolve. He had discovered what truly mattered: the capacity for integrity, kindness, and responsibility in someone who would wield power with wisdom rather than entitlement. The recognition of Emily's character, became the moral anchor for the final chapter of his life. As the city lights reflected off the wet streets outside the diner, John felt a rare sense of clarity. He had witnessed greed, indifference, and transactional behavior in countless settings over his lifetime. Yet Emily's example reminded him that the world was not entirely lost. True human goodness existed, waiting to be recognized and protected. The discovery reshaped his understanding of wealth, legacy, and purpose. It was no longer sufficient to accumulate money or power. It had to be entrusted wisely, in the hands of someone who would honor the values that defined a meaningful life. By the time John left the diner that night, he had made his choice. Emily Davis was not just a kind stranger, she was the embodiment of the principles he wanted to perpetuate. She had earned his trust through consistent, selfless action, proving that character was far more valuable than inheritance alone. In the weeks and months ahead, John would take the steps necessary to ensure that his empire would be guided by the same integrity and humanity that Emily displayed in every interaction, no matter how small. Her influence, though indirect at first, had already begun to reshape his vision of what legacy could truly mean. After weeks of observing and reflecting, John Anderson sat at his desk in the corner of his Manhattan penthouse, papers spread out like a tactical map. The city outside buzzed with life, but within the quiet of his office, John's thoughts were focused entirely on one thing, ensuring that his empire would go to someone who deserved it, not to those motivated solely by greed. Emily Davis, the young waitress who had shown him unearned kindness, had become the measure against which he judged every decision. Her integrity and humanity were unparalleled in his experience, and he knew that his fortune would be better served in her hands than in those of his entitled children. The task was daunting not because of the legal complexity alone, but because the implications were so profound. He was rewriting not just a will, but the trajectory of his entire legacy. John began by contacting his most trusted attorney, Samuel Green, a man who had handled the Anderson estate for decades and had seen every boardroom maneuver and family dispute imaginable. "Sam," John said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I need to make changes, big ones. Ones that will protect someone who isn't family, someone who actually deserves it." Samuel's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he remained composed, waiting for John to elaborate. The discussion that followed was intense, technical, and precise. John explained his observations, his decision to entrust Emily, and his reasoning for excluding Marcus and Laura from the primary inheritance. Samuel nodded, occasionally jotting notes, understanding that his client's decision was final and carefully considered. The first step was legal clarity. John insisted that the new will be airtight, with multiple safeguards to prevent interference. He wanted the transfer of assets to be unambiguous and protected from manipulation. He instructed Samuel to create blind trusts, delayed disclosures, and contingency plans that would shield Emily from lawsuits, intimidation, or public scrutiny. Each instruction John gave was calculated to protect her anonymity and her safety. He knew the resistance from his children would be intense. Their sense of entitlement had been apparent for decades. Marcus would try to reclaim control through legal means, and Laura would likely attempt to discredit Emily with allegations of manipulation or undue influence. John wanted to preempt every possible avenue of attack, leaving no loophole unsealed. As they worked through the documents, John reflected on the moral significance of his decision. It was not merely about transferring wealth. It was about choosing character over bloodline. This was the moment he had been preparing for throughout his experiment. Wealth, he realized, was a tool, and tools could either empower good or exacerbate corruption. Placing it in the hands of someone like Emily meant that the fortune could continue to have purpose, serve humanity, and reflect the values he had long cherished but had never seen embodied in his own family. Every clause, every legal provision was infused with this philosophy. The technicalities were secondary. The primary objective was the ethical placement of his assets. The emotional weight of the decision was profound. John had spent his entire life accumulating power, controlling every aspect of his environment, and meticulously planning for succession. To now relinquish control, to give everything to a stranger, was radical. Yet, in that radical act, he found peace. The thought of Marcus and Laura squabbling over a fortune they had not earned no longer burdened him. He felt a sense of liberation, an affirmation that he could leave behind more than wealth. He could leave a model of integrity, a legacy defined by character rather than convenience. Practicalities demanded equal attention. John and Samuel worked through asset lists, company holdings, real estate, and liquid funds. They discussed potential public reactions and media scrutiny, recognizing that such a dramatic shift would attract attention. John instructed that Emily's identity remain secret until after the legal formalities were complete and the estate fully transferred. This secrecy was crucial. It was not only to protect her from lawsuits and manipulation, but also to allow her to adjust to the responsibilities of wealth without the immediate pressure of public opinion. John understood that sudden exposure could be overwhelming, and he wanted her to inherit not just money, but the ability to manage it wisely, safely, and with the integrity she had already shown. Each evening, after reviewing the legal documents, John returned to thoughts of Emily. He thought of the way she had instinctively offered him a seat by the heater, the warmth in her voice, and the effortless kindness she had displayed in small acts. These were not performative gestures, they were expressions of her character. John compared them to decades of interactions with his own children, which had been steeped in calculation, negotiation, and self-interest. Emily had demonstrated that true worth could not be taught in business schools or inherited through family lines. It had to be observed, earned, and recognized. Her example had crystallized the purpose of his wealth and the guiding principle for his final actions. As the legal framework took shape, John prepared for potential confrontation. He anticipated threats from Marcus and Laura, public outrage, and even media speculation. He instructed Samuel to draft responses and establish protocols to counter any false narratives. The goal was not to intimidate his children, but to ensure that Emily's rights were protected. John's decision was deliberate. He wanted the wealth to empower her, not embroil her in conflict. He recognized that true kindness and integrity, when tested by sudden power, could be fragile. His responsibility extended beyond transfer of wealth. It included shielding her from corruption, manipulation, and pressure that might compromise her moral compass. Throughout the process, John also reflected on the broader implications. By placing his fortune in the hands of someone who exemplified moral strength, he was challenging societal assumptions about inheritance, family loyalty, and the nature of legacy. He was proving that character could outweigh lineage, that decency could surpass entitlement, and that the influence of wealth could be used to uplift rather than exploit. This philosophical dimension gave him a sense of purpose even as his health declined. He realized that the true measure of a life well lived was not the accumulation of assets, but the impact those assets could have when wielded responsibly. The culmination of weeks of planning arrived when John signed the final documents. Each signature, each notarized page, carried with it the weight of decades of observation, reflection, and moral reckoning. He felt a deep sense of resolution. For the first time since his diagnosis, he felt that his legacy would not be squandered, that the fortune he had built would be guided by someone with vision, empathy, and integrity. The process had been exhaustive, meticulous, and emotionally taxing, but it was necessary. John knew that when the world eventually learned the decision, it would provoke shock and anger, but he was unwavering. The foundation of his final act was character, and character, he believed, was the only measure worth honoring. As he set aside the documents, John allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought of Emily continuing her work in the diner, unaware of the revolution she had already inspired in his mind. He thought of the power of small acts of kindness, the ripple effect of integrity, and the way human decency could shape a legacy far beyond money. His empire, once defined by contracts, acquisitions, and financial leverage, would now be defined by the values he had discovered in someone outside his family. This was the true inheritance he wanted to leave behind, a world improved by the moral courage of one individual. John rose from his desk and looked out at the city skyline, feeling the gravity of his actions settle around him. The decision was complete. The legal foundation was secure. The path ahead was certain in its purpose, even if uncertain in the challenges it would bring. For the first time he felt not fear, but a profound sense of peace. His wealth would not be squandered. His empire would not perpetuate greed or entitlement. It would, instead, serve as a tool for integrity, guided by a person whose character he trusted completely. The work was finished, And in that completion, John Anderson found clarity, resolution, and the quiet satisfaction of having finally done what was right. When Marcus and Laura Anderson learned of their father's decision to alter his will, the reaction in the family's upper floor offices and penthouses was explosive. Marcus, who had always considered himself the natural heir to John's fortune, felt the floor shift beneath him. He had spent years preparing, studying financial strategies, and positioning himself to take over Sterling Holdings seamlessly. To be excluded entirely was not just a disappointment, it was an affront, a betrayal that he could not process rationally. He paced the polished floors of his Manhattan apartment, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp as he demanded explanations from lawyers, family advisors, and anyone who could provide clarity. Every call, every inquiry, only confirmed his worst fears. Their father had made a conscious choice to exclude them from the wealth, and the power they had assumed was rightfully theirs. Laura, in contrast, approached the news with a cool, calculated demeanor, masking her fury behind a mask of polite disbelief. She sat in the drawing room of her Upper East Side townhouse, hands folded, rehearsing the precise words she would use when confronting the legal team. While Marcus reacted with visible anger, Laura's approach was more strategic. She began reaching out to family friends, financial consultants, and media contacts subtly, planting seeds that would protect her own position while casting doubt on the validity of the will. She questioned every clause, every legal safeguard, probing for weaknesses. Her mind worked like a boardroom negotiation, but her motivations were personal. She wanted not just a share of the estate, but control, influence, and above all, to assert that she had been wronged. The siblings' reactions were swift and unrelenting. Within days, Marcus had assembled a small team of legal and financial advisors to investigate every possible angle to challenge the will. Private investigators were hired to dig into Emily Davis's background, searching for any hint of impropriety, manipulation, or prior connections that could be used to discredit her. Laura, meanwhile, coordinated with media contacts, strategically leaking information designed to create public doubt and pressure. The combined effect was overwhelming for anyone caught in the crosshairs. Their tactics were precise, relentless, and entirely predictable for John, who had anticipated this behavior from the beginning. John observed the escalation from a distance, his resolve unshaken. While the storm of anger and manipulation raged through his children, he understood that their behavior confirmed his initial suspicions. Marcus and Laura were motivated entirely by self-interest, incapable of acting with integrity or empathy. Their reactions reinforced the wisdom of his decision. Every legal challenge, every attempt to manipulate the narrative, served as evidence that character, not bloodline, was the truest measure of who should inherit his empire. John felt a grim satisfaction as he watched them reveal their priorities so clearly, without realizing that their actions were validating his choice. Meanwhile, Emily Davis remained completely unaware of the chaos her presence had triggered. She continued her work at the diner with the same quiet dedication and patience as always, caring for customers and her young daughter, without the slightest hint of concern for wealth or inheritance. John had intentionally kept her in the dark until the legal process was complete. Knowing that sudden exposure could jeopardize both her safety and her ability to manage the fortune responsibly, she lived her life one shift at a time, counting tips, preparing meals, and navigating the challenges of single parenthood with resilience. The contrast between her world and that of Marcus and Laura could not have been starker. The pressure from Marcus and Laura intensified over the following weeks. Letters from lawyers arrived, inquiries were made to the trustee, and the siblings began attending meetings designed to challenge John's mental competency and decision-making. They questioned every aspect of his health, every medical diagnosis, and every detail of the legal process. Their strategy was clear. If they could cast doubt on John's judgment, they could potentially invalidate the will. Marcus's tone was aggressive and confrontational, designed to intimidate, while Laura's approach was subtle and insidious, aimed at undermining confidence and creating uncertainty. John, however, had anticipated both approaches. Every clause in the legal documents had been carefully constructed, every contingency accounted for. No tactic could sway the validity of his decision. Even as the attacks mounted, John remained focused on his purpose. He knew the storm would pass, and when it did, the wealth and the empire would rest where it belonged. The intensity of the siblings' reactions was not surprising. It was confirmation of the very traits he had observed for decades: entitlement, greed, and a lack of moral compass. Marcus and Laura acted exactly as John had expected, revealing their true character in the process. Their behavior, he realized, underscored the importance of his choice, validating the decades of observation, reflection, and meticulous planning that had led to this moment. John also reflected on the broader lessons of this conflict. The intensity of Marcus and Laura's responses highlighted how wealth could distort priorities, erode empathy, and obscure values. In their world, control and inheritance were more important than decency or responsibility. Their approach to the situation provided a stark contrast to Emily's actions, emphasizing that integrity and kindness were rare commodities, often found in unexpected places. John's confidence in his decision grew with each passing day, reinforced by the contrast between his children's behavior and the character he had witnessed in Emily. The legal and emotional pressure reached a crescendo when Marcus attempted to directly confront John, demanding a meeting to discuss fairness and responsibility. He arrived at the penthouse with a team of lawyers and advisors, prepared for confrontation. Laura followed with media contacts, ready to frame the narrative for public consumption. John met them in the family's private office, composed and steady. He listened to their arguments, their accusations, and their thinly veiled threats. He allowed them to speak, knowing that every word revealed their true motivations and confirmed the correctness of his actions. Their attempts to sway him, intimidate him, or undermine Emily's position were futile. The legal framework he had constructed was airtight, and their lack of integrity ensured that their efforts would fail. In the days following the confrontation, John monitored the fallout from a distance. Lawyers continued to push, media stories emerged, and private investigators scoured for dirt, but Emily remained insulated from the chaos. Her life continued with quiet perseverance, a testament to her resilience and character. John felt a sense of reassurance knowing that, when the time came, she would inherit not just wealth, but the ability to handle it with wisdom and integrity. The conflict, while intense, had served a purpose. It had exposed the true character of everyone involved, reinforcing John's belief in the power of virtue over bloodline, and ensuring that his legacy would be preserved in the hands of someone truly deserving. Through the turmoil, John's sense of peace deepened. He had anticipated the challenge, prepared for it meticulously, and observed it unfold with clarity. Marcus and Laura had revealed themselves fully, demonstrating exactly why they were unfit to inherit the empire. Emily, by contrast, remained steadfast, uncorrupted by ambition or greed, embodying the values that John wished to preserve. In this contrast, John found not only validation for his decision, but the satisfaction of knowing that his empire would serve a higher purpose, guided by the moral compass of someone capable of wielding power responsibly. The finalization of John Anderson's inheritance plan was an exercise in precision, patience, and meticulous foresight. Sitting at his polished oak desk in the Manhattan penthouse, he watched the legal team move through the final stages of document verification. Each page was scrutinized, each signature notarized, every contingency accounted for. John knew that once this process was complete, nothing could reverse it. Marcus and Laura's protests, the media's scrutiny, or the pressure of friends and advisors would be powerless against the airtight legal structure. He leaned back, letting the weight of the decision settle around him. For years, wealth had dictated his every interaction, yet now, he was about to place that wealth into the hands of someone whose moral compass he trusted completely. Emily Davis had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She continued her routine at the Brooklyn diner, juggling the demands of the shift and her young daughter's needs with remarkable composure. The world she knew was small, immediate, and tangible. Tips counted, school schedules mattered, bills had to be paid. Yet, unbeknownst to her, John had constructed a future in which she would become the steward of one of the largest private fortunes in the city. This dissonance between her humble daily reality and the magnitude of what awaited her was deliberate. John wanted to ensure that she would inherit without pressure, without interference, and without the immediate glare of public attention clouding her judgment. The legal process required careful navigation. Samuel Green, John's longtime attorney, had coordinated with multiple layers of trust management and financial institutions to ensure that Emily's identity remained protected. Blind trusts were established and timelines were set for staged disclosure. Every asset, from Sterling Holdings properties to cash reserves and investment portfolios, was accounted for. John observed each detail, reviewing spreadsheets, trust agreements, and contingency clauses with precision. He understood that wealth, without careful stewardship, could overwhelm or corrupt even the most virtuous of recipients. It was not enough to transfer money. He needed to safeguard the conditions under which it would be received and managed. During the week, John began to consider the introduction process for Emily. It was a delicate task. She could not simply be handed control of the empire overnight. Such a sudden transition would be overwhelming, fraught with risk, and potentially perilous to her well-being. John and Samuel designed a gradual engagement strategy. Initially, Emily would be informed of her legal rights and the existence of the trust. Subsequent steps would include private briefings with financial advisors, tours of the properties, and incremental exposure to corporate decision-making. Each step was designed to provide context, guidance, and support, ensuring that she could absorb the responsibility gradually while retaining the moral clarity that had initially impressed John. Meanwhile, Marcus and Laura were relentless. The siblings' fury had grown into a full-scale campaign to undermine the legal framework. Letters were sent, subpoenas requested, private investigators employed, and media contacts quietly fed stories suggesting impropriety. John, however, remained steadfast. He monitored the developments with a mixture of detachment and satisfaction. The attempts to discredit Emily only confirmed what he already knew. Marcus and Laura were motivated by entitlement and self-interest. Their strategies lacked the integrity, foresight, and ethical foundation that Emily had demonstrated in every interaction with him. Their predictable behavior was, paradoxically, a source of reassurance. It validated his choice and reinforced the importance of a well-constructed legal foundation. As the final documents were executed, John allowed himself a moment to reflect. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this point, the weeks of wandering through New York as an anonymous man, the repeated rejections, the observations of human behavior, and ultimately, the encounter with Emily Davis. That small diner, the modest act of kindness she had shown him, had revealed a character capable of shouldering responsibility with integrity, humility, and courage. In that moment, he realized that legacy was not merely about inheritance, it was about placing resources into the hands of those who would act wisely, ethically, and for the greater good. The transition plan also considered Emily's personal life. John understood that sudden access to immense wealth could disrupt her routines, affect her daughter, and alter the equilibrium she had worked hard to maintain. Advisors were briefed to provide ongoing support, financial literacy training, and guidance in managing both personal and corporate responsibilities. John wanted to ensure that her character, which had impressed him so profoundly, would not be compromised by shock, temptation, or external pressures. The stewardship he envisioned was not simply financial. It was ethical, practical, and holistic, designed to preserve the human qualities that had made her the right choice. As the disclosure day approached, John felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. He had spent decades mastering the control of others' perceptions, yet now he was about to relinquish control in a way that would irrevocably alter lives. Marcus and Laura would react predictably, the public would speculate, and Emily's own world would shift dramatically. Yet John was confident in the safeguards he had established, and in the strength of the character he was entrusting. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of calm, knowing that the empire he had built would not be squandered, and that the values he held dear would be represented faithfully. The meeting with Emily was scheduled in a neutral location, a small conference room away from public scrutiny. She arrived, unsuspecting, her demeanor composed yet cautious, as she had always approached life's challenges. John greeted her warmly, without revealing the scale of what awaited her, initially presenting only the legal aspects of her rights and responsibilities. He observed her reactions, carefully, attentiveness, careful questions, a calm yet deliberate consideration of the implications. Emily's approach reinforced his confidences. She processed information logically, measured risks, and exhibited an ethical clarity that aligned perfectly with his expectations. Over the next several days, John and his team began incrementally revealing aspects of the empire to Emily. They showed her financial statements, property portfolios, and corporate structures. At each step, She asked thoughtful questions, considered the human impact of decisions, and demonstrated prudence and empathy. John watched her navigate these revelations with the same grace and moral certainty that had initially captured his attention. Each interaction reinforced his belief that his decision was not just correct, but transformative. She was not seeking power or personal gain. She was absorbing knowledge to act responsibly, and the integrity that had guided her small acts of kindness now informed her understanding of responsibility at an unprecedented scale. By the end of the first week, Emily began to grasp the magnitude of her new reality. John's careful planning ensured that the transition was manageable, with advisors and mentors guiding her decisions. The empire, vast and complex, was now in the hands of someone whose judgment he trusted implicitly. John allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The fortune he had built would now serve a purpose greater than wealth itself. It would reflect values, integrity, and the enduring power of human decency. The journey that had begun with a single act of kindness in a small diner had now culminated in the preservation of a legacy that transcended money, control, or entitlement. As Emily Davis gradually assumed her new role, she approached the empire with a sense of purpose tempered by humility. Every decision she made was informed not by ambition or greed, but by the principles she had always lived by: integrity, empathy, and responsibility. Her first actions were small yet meaningful: reviewing employee contracts, ensuring fair wages, and addressing long-standing grievances within Sterling Holdings that had been neglected under previous leadership. She understood that wealth was not just numbers on a ledger. It represented the livelihoods, dignity, and well-being of countless individuals. John Anderson, observing from a distance, felt a growing sense of pride. Emily was not simply managing the empire. She was transforming it into a reflection of her values, reshaping corporate culture one thoughtful decision at a time. The initial changes Emily implemented were met with both surprise and skepticism from the board and long-time executives. Some questioned her lack of traditional business experience, whispering doubts about her ability to navigate complex financial landscapes. Others were quietly impressed, noting that her decisions were steady, well-considered, and beneficial to the company's long-term health. Emily welcomed counsel but refused to compromise her moral judgment for expediency. She prioritized transparency, ethical practices, and the human impact of each choice, gradually winning the respect of those who had initially doubted her. Her approach, though unconventional, began to instill a culture of trust and accountability that had long been absent in the corporation. Meanwhile, Marcus and Laura Anderson's resistance intensified. Their sense of entitlement had evolved into open hostility. They attempted every strategy to regain control of the empire, from public accusations against Emily to legal challenges asserting undue influence and questioning John's mental competency at the time of the will's execution. Marcus, blunt and confrontational, sought to intimidate executives and employees into loyalty, trying to turn the board against Emily. Laura, subtle and cunning, leveraged media contacts, crafting narratives that painted Emily as an opportunist manipulating John for personal gain. Their coordinated efforts were relentless, yet John had anticipated these moves and ensured that legal safeguards, blind trusts, and protective measures insulated Emily from their influence. Emily, however, proved remarkably resilient under pressure. She refused to engage in reactive strategies or personal confrontations, instead focusing on understanding the company, its assets, and the people who depended on it. She held meetings with department heads, listening carefully to their concerns and perspectives. She visited company sites personally, observing operations and meeting employees. Her demeanor, calm, attentive, and unassuming, contrasted sharply with the aggressive tactics of Marcus and Laura. In doing so, she demonstrated a leadership style that was collaborative yet decisive, ethical yet effective. Employees began to see her as a leader who valued them as individuals, not just as cogs in a corporate machine, and loyalty gradually shifted toward her. The tension between Emily and the Anderson siblings escalated when Marcus attempted a direct confrontation at a corporate strategy meeting. He arrived with legal advisors and financial consultants, expecting to assert authority and challenge her decisions publicly. Emily, aware of his motives, maintained her composure. She presented her analysis and recommendations clearly and logically, emphasizing the benefits to employees, stakeholders, and the long-term health of the company. Marcus, frustrated by the inability to provoke a misstep or elicit an emotional reaction, left the meeting visibly shaken. The executives and board members, witnessing the exchange, began to recognize the contrast between Emily's rational, ethical approach and Marcus's confrontational, entitlement-driven behavior. Laura, meanwhile, escalated her media campaign. Articles questioning Emily's competence appeared in financial and lifestyle publications. Rumors of manipulation and undue influence circulated on social media. Emily, however, refused to respond defensively. Instead, she focused on measurable results, addressing long-standing inefficiencies, implementing ethical practices, and improving working conditions. Every success became a silent rebuttal to the rumors, demonstrating that her leadership was grounded in substance rather than perception. John, watching the developments, felt a profound sense of reassurance. Emily's integrity, tested under intense scrutiny, remained unshaken. Her capacity for calm, ethical decision-making under pressure validated his choice and provided proof that character could guide power effectively. The stakes grew higher when Marcus attempted to influence the board, pressuring them to challenge Emily's authority and assert control over corporate assets. He leveraged his familiarity with internal politics and financial leverage, hoping to sway decision-making. Emily, however, anticipated such maneuvers. She meticulously documented every action, maintained transparency in all decisions, and built coalitions with executives and employees who valued ethical governance. Her credibility, reinforced by tangible improvements in fairness, began to neutralize the influence Marcus sought to wield. The board's confidence shifted decisively in her favor, demonstrating that consistent, principled action could overcome power plays rooted in entitlement and aggression. During this period, Emily's approach to the company began to reshape the corporate culture. She implemented mentorship programs, prioritized employee well-being, and created channels for feedback that encouraged openness and accountability. Decisions that had once been driven solely by profit and efficiency now incorporated ethical considerations and human impact assessments. Employees, many of whom had previously felt marginalized or undervalued, began to trust leadership and engage more proactively. Emily's influence was not only structural but moral, instilling a sense of responsibility and pride that had long been absent. Her leadership style became a model for sustainable, ethical governance. Despite these successes, Emily faced ongoing challenges from external pressures. Marcus and Laura continued their campaigns, filing legal motions, and seeking to undermine her credibility through public and private channels. The media scrutiny intensified, with some outlets framing her as a disruptive figure or an unqualified outsider. Yet Emily remained grounded, relying on data, ethical reasoning, and the support of the team she had cultivated. John, observing the unfolding dynamics, saw in her resilience a reflection of the very qualities that had initially convinced him to entrust her with his empire. She was not swayed by threats, intimidation, or public opinion. She acted with clarity and purpose, guided by principles rather than fear or ambition. The cumulative effect of Emily's leadership and Marcus and Laura's resistance began to reshape the power dynamics within the company. Employees and executives increasingly aligned with Emily, recognizing her competence, ethical grounding, and commitment to the well-being of all stakeholders. Marcus's aggressive tactics became ineffective, while Laura's media campaigns lacked credibility in the face of demonstrable improvements and transparent practices. Emily's influence extended beyond decision-making. It reshaped the company's identity, aligning financial success with human values, accountability, and ethical governance. John's sense of satisfaction grew as he witnessed the transformation. What had begun as an experiment to observe human character had culminated in the establishment of a new paradigm for leadership. Emily Davis, once a waitress in a small Brooklyn diner, had proven herself capable of guiding immense responsibility with integrity and wisdom. The resistance from Marcus and Laura, while intense, had only highlighted the contrast between entitlement-driven aggression and principled leadership. John understood that his choice had been correct. Wealth, when entrusted to character rather than bloodline, could achieve outcomes far beyond mere financial gain. Through this period of transition, Emily never lost sight of her personal values. She maintained her modest lifestyle, remained attentive to her daughter's needs, and continued to approach challenges with thoughtfulness and empathy. Her leadership was defined not by self-interest or ambition, but by a commitment to fairness, responsibility, and the human impact of every decision. In doing so, she not only solidified her authority over the empire, but also ensured that the legacy John had envisioned, one of ethical stewardship, compassion, and integrity, would endure long after he was gone. Emily Davis, now firmly in control of Sterling Holdings, approached her role with the same empathy and integrity that had first caught John Anderson's attention. Her first priority was not to maximize profits or assert dominance, but to address the structural inequities that had accumulated over decades. She reviewed the company's operations, identifying areas where employees had been overworked, underpaid, or ignored. By implementing fair wage increases, flexible schedules, and wellness programs, she immediately improved the lives of hundreds of staff members. Employees who had once felt invisible began to feel valued, motivated, and respected. The ripple effect was noticeable. Productivity increased, morale improved, and the culture of the company shifted from one of fear and indifference to one of trust and collaboration. Beyond internal reforms, Emily focused on the company's role within the community. She launched initiatives to support local schools, fund scholarships, and provide resources to struggling families. Emily understood that an empire, no matter how vast, existed within a broader social ecosystem. By directing resources and attention toward the community, she not only improved lives but also reinforced a culture of ethical responsibility. She held public forums to listen to community needs, establishing a two-way channel that allowed the company to respond thoughtfully and meaningfully. This approach was unprecedented in Sterling Holdings' history, and it generated respect both locally and nationally. Emily also tackled environmental sustainability. She identified ways the company could reduce waste, invest in renewable energy, and implement eco-friendly practices across its properties. These initiatives were not just symbolic, they were financially sound and socially responsible. Employees were encouraged to participate, and community partners were invited to collaborate. Emily's vision was holistic. Success was not measured solely by revenue, but by the positive impact on employees, customers, and the environment. Every major decision she made was filtered through this ethical lens, demonstrating a balance between profitability and moral responsibility that redefined what it meant to lead a corporate empire. Her approach immediately drew attention from business analysts and the media. Many were skeptical at first, expecting missteps or failures due to her lack of traditional corporate experience. However, Emily consistently proved them wrong. Her decisions were data-informed, strategically sound, and ethically guided. Profits stabilized, turnover decreased, and the company's reputation improved dramatically. Emily's leadership demonstrated that moral integrity could coexist with financial success, challenging long-held assumptions in the corporate world. Investors began to view Sterling Holdings as a model of sustainable, ethical business, and slowly, trust in her leadership grew outside the immediate corporate structure. Internally, Emily continued to build relationships with employees at all levels. She made a point to personally meet with department heads, frontline workers, and support staff, listening carefully to their concerns and suggestions. Her transparency and willingness to act on feedback created a sense of shared purpose. Employees no longer felt like replaceable parts of a machinist. They were stakeholders in the company's mission. This inclusive leadership style fostered creativity and innovation, as individuals were encouraged to contribute ideas without fear of reprisal. Teams began experimenting with new approaches, testing solutions for efficiency, quality, and social responsibility. Emily cultivated a culture where ethical decision-making became a competitive advantage rather than a hindrance. Meanwhile, Marcus and Laura Anderson continued their attempts to destabilize Emily's authority. They intensified legal challenges, questioning her decisions and casting doubt on her competence. Marcus sought to pressure the board, while Laura continued to use the media to sway public opinion. Emily, however, remained undeterred. She focused on tangible results, using evidence and clear communication to counter misinformation. Each victory, no matter how small, reinforced her credibility and diminished the influence of her detractors. Employees and community members began to recognize the contrast between her principled leadership and the entitlement-driven tactics of her siblings. Emily also initiated programs to identify and nurture talent within the company. She established mentorship programs aimed at developing leadership skills among promising employees who lacked traditional educational opportunities. Scholarships, training, and professional development workshops were introduced, giving staff pathways to advance and contribute meaningfully to the company's growth. Her goal was not only to improve the current workforce, but to create a pipeline of principled leaders for the future. She believed that nurturing character and competence simultaneously was essential for long-term stability and ethical governance. As Emily gained confidence, she tackled more ambitious corporate transformations. She reviewed underperforming properties and divisions, restructuring them to improve efficiency and impact. Rather than cutting jobs indiscriminately, she sought innovative solutions to preserve employment while optimizing operations. This included cross-training programs, employee-led improvement initiatives, and partnerships with local organizations to create opportunities for professional growth. By maintaining her focus on ethical decision-making, Emily proved that corporate restructuring could be humane, strategic, and profitable. The community began to notice the tangible effects of Emily's leadership. Schools received funding for technology upgrades and extracurricular programs. Local non-profits benefited from grants and volunteer partnerships facilitated by Sterling Holdings. Employees felt empowered to contribute to community initiatives, creating a sense of purpose and pride. Emily's approach transformed not only the company but also the social fabric surrounding it. Her vision extended beyond profit, recognizing that an empire's responsibility included the well-being of both employees and the broader community. Even as her influence expanded, Emily maintained a connection to her past. She continued her daily routines of personal responsibility, ensuring that her daughter's needs were met and that her life retained grounding in the values she had always upheld. This balance between personal life and corporate responsibility reinforced her authenticity, making her leadership relatable and inspiring. Those around her began to see that true power did not lie in exerting control, but in exercising ethical judgment, empathy, and accountability. Through these efforts, Sterling Holdings began to flourish under Emily's guidance. Employee satisfaction, community engagement, and financial stability improved concurrently, demonstrating that ethical leadership could yield tangible results. Emily's influence created a culture of trust and mutual respect, empowering employees to take ownership of their work and contribute creatively to problem solving. The company's transformation became a model for others in the industry, showcasing that profitability and social responsibility were not mutually exclusive. As months passed, John Anderson watched Emily from afar with a profound sense of fulfillment. What had begun as a simple test of character in a small diner had evolved into a full-scale transformation of one of the city's most prominent business empires. Emily's leadership validated his choice, demonstrating that wealth could indeed be a force for good when placed in the hands of someone with vision, empathy, and integrity. The empire he had built now reflected not only his achievements but the enduring moral and ethical lessons embodied by Emily Davis, the waitress who had chosen kindness above all else. The weeks following Emily Davis's initial actions as head of Sterling Holdings were marked by escalating tension. Marcus and Laura Anderson, frustrated by their repeated failures to assert influence, shifted their strategy from subtle manipulation to overt confrontation. They hired top-tier law firms, seeking any legal loophole that might overturn John Anderson's meticulously constructed will. Marcus, with his typical blunt aggression, demanded board meetings to challenge her authority, while Laura, ever the strategist, coordinated a media campaign to sway public perception against Emily. Every day brought new pressures, letters, subpoenas, rumors, and investigations, but Emily's calm and principled approach allowed her to navigate the storm without compromise. Her confidence was rooted in the legal safeguards her father had put in place, ensuring that she could act decisively without fear of undermining her position. Emily's first priority during this period was to stabilize the company while resisting external pressure. She maintained transparency with the board, employees, and stakeholders, documenting every action and decision. Her meticulous records and ethical conduct provided a shield against legal challenges and public scrutiny. She understood that appearances mattered as much as outcomes. By demonstrating competence and integrity, she could counter every attempt by Marcus and Laura to portray her as unqualified or manipulative. Employees began to rally behind her, seeing in her leadership a model of fairness and moral clarity. The morale boost was palpable, and the corporate culture shifted further toward accountability and collaboration. Marcus and Laura's tactics escalated when they attempted to challenge her decisions in court. They claimed undue influence over their father, questioning his mental state during the finalization of the will. John's legal team had anticipated this and provided comprehensive documentation of every action taken to protect Emily, including notarized declarations, witness statements, and medical records confirming John's competence. The court proceedings began with aggressive posturing from the siblings, but Emily remained disengaged from the drama, relying instead on the strength of the legal framework and her documented ethical conduct. The contrast between her calm, methodical approach and their emotional, reactive strategy became apparent to everyone involved. As the litigation unfolded, public attention increased. Media outlets sensationalized the battle, framing Emily as the waitress turned billionaire and questioning her ability to manage such a vast empire. Emily, however, continued her work without distraction. She held meetings, reviewed company operations, and implemented strategic initiatives. Her effectiveness, measured in tangible improvements across the company and community, gradually shifted public perception. Articles began to highlight her ethical leadership, community engagement, and tangible business results. Her silence in the face of provocation, combined with consistent, principled action, spoke louder than any media narrative Marcus and Laura could generate. Internally, Emily began to solidify her influence over Sterling Holdings. She convened executive committees to streamline decision-making, introduced new reporting structures to increase accountability, and empowered employees to participate in problem-solving. She encouraged innovation, ethical conduct, and transparency, creating a corporate environment where actions aligned with values rather than expediency. This transformation did not happen overnight, but its effects were visible. Employees were more engaged, operational inefficiencies were reduced, and company culture had shifted from fear-driven compliance to purpose-driven collaboration. The siblings' frustration grew as their influence waned. Marcus tried to leverage personal relationships with certain board members to sway votes in his favor, but Emily's reputation and track record had earned the trust of the majority. Laura attempted to use the media to create public pressure, orchestrating campaigns that framed Emily as inexperienced and opportunistic. Each attempt, however, backfired. The public, seeing her continued success and principled leadership, increasingly sided with Emily. Analysts began to note the company's improved performance under her guidance, reinforcing the perception that ethical, transparent leadership could be both moral and profitable. Emily also focused on long-term sustainability. She reviewed the company's environmental practices, community programs, and employee development initiatives. Investments were made in green infrastructure, education, and social programs that benefited both employees and the surrounding communities. Her approach demonstrated that a billionaire empire could have a positive impact on society without compromising financial stability. Each initiative reinforced her credibility and authority, further diminishing any remaining influence Marcus and Laura hoped to exert. The turning point came during a critical board meeting where Marcus attempted to challenge her strategic decisions publicly. He presented a series of arguments questioning her ability to manage high-level corporate strategy, expecting to provoke hesitation or error. Emily responded with precise data, clear rationale, and ethical reasoning. Every recommendation was backed by evidence and demonstrated alignment with both business goals and social responsibility. The board, impressed by her poise and clarity, overwhelmingly supported her initiatives. Marcus's attempts to undermine her authority failed spectacularly, and his credibility with the board and senior executives suffered irreparably. Simultaneously, Laura's media campaign began to falter. Stories that once painted Emily as reckless or inexperienced were overshadowed by reports highlighting her successful initiatives and the measurable improvements across the company and community. Stakeholders began to see the futility of opposing her, and public opinion increasingly favored her leadership. Emily's consistent demonstration of integrity and competence contrasted sharply with her siblings' reactive, entitlement-driven tactics, illustrating that ethical leadership not only survives scrutiny but thrives under it. Emily's consolidation of power extended to her personal engagement with company operations. She visited multiple facilities, met with employees from various departments, and implemented programs that empowered staff at all levels. Employees who had once been disengaged or fearful now felt a sense of ownership and responsibility. They saw that leadership could be principled, transparent, and effective simultaneously. This cultural shift strengthened her position, as the company's success was now tied not just to her decisions, but to the active participation and loyalty of the workforce. The siblings' final efforts to challenge her authority, including legal motions and public campaigns, ultimately failed. The legal framework John had established, combined with Emily's documented ethical decision-making and tangible results, proved insurmountable. Judges, executives, and stakeholders recognized her competence, integrity, and the legality of her inheritance. Marcus and Laura were forced to acknowledge, grudgingly, that their attempts to reclaim control were ineffective. Their failures highlighted the central lesson John had intended: bloodline alone did not determine who was fit to lead. Character, integrity, and the capacity for principled action did. By the end of this tumultuous period, Emily had solidified her control over Sterling Holdings. The company, once a rigid, profit-driven machine, was now a thriving, ethically managed organization with engaged employees, improved community relations, and sustainable business practices. John Anderson, observing the transformation from a distance, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Emily's leadership validated every decision he had made, demonstrating that wealth, when entrusted to the right person, could be a force for good, resilience, and lasting impact. By the time Emily Davis had firmly established herself as the head of Sterling Holdings, the company was unrecognizable from its former self. The sterile, profit-driven corridors that had once defined its culture were replaced with open spaces that encouraged collaboration, transparency, and ethical decision-making. Emily had implemented programs that gave employees at all levels a voice in corporate strategy, fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility that had previously been absent. Her reforms extended beyond superficial changes. They reflected a deep understanding that a company's true value lay not only in its assets, but in the people who made it function. Employees responded to her leadership with loyalty, creativity, and a renewed sense of purpose, transforming the day-to-day operations into a harmonious and productive environment. Emily's influence reached beyond the walls of the corporation and into the communities where Sterling Holdings operated. Recognizing that wealth carried responsibility, she launched initiatives designed to uplift underserved neighborhoods. Funding was directed toward schools, libraries, and local nonprofit organizations. Programs for job training, scholarships, and mentorship created opportunities for individuals who might otherwise have been overlooked. Emily believed that an empire should serve a broader purpose than mere accumulation of capital. It should act as a force for societal good. Her vision of stewardship extended to sustainability as well, with investments in renewable energy, environmentally conscious building practices, and corporate social responsibility programs that minimized the company's ecological footprint. Under Emily's guidance, Sterling Holdings became a model for ethical corporate governance. She insisted on transparency in all decision-making, ensuring that stakeholders from employees to investors understood the rationale behind each initiative. Ethical considerations were embedded in strategic planning, and profitability was balanced with the welfare of employees and the community. The results were remarkable. Not only did financial performance remain strong, but the company's reputation improved dramatically, attracting talent, partners, and clients who shared Emily's values. Her leadership demonstrated that ethical management was not only morally right but also pragmatically advantageous. Internally, Emily continued to cultivate talent and leadership within the company. She established mentorship programs, professional development workshops, and leadership training designed to prepare employees for positions of responsibility. She sought out individuals with integrity, vision, and a commitment to ethical practices, nurturing their growth so that they could continue her approach in perpetuity. By investing in human capital alongside financial assets, Emily ensured that the values she had introduced would be sustainable, embedding a culture of accountability, empathy, and strategic foresight that would persist long after her tenure. Emily's approach to decision-making was methodical and principled. Every major initiative, whether a corporate acquisition, a restructuring of operations, or a community engagement project, was evaluated not only for its financial implications but also for its ethical and social impact. She prioritized long-term benefits over short-term gains, understanding that sustainable success required a foundation built on trust, integrity, and social responsibility. This holistic perspective distinguished her from previous leadership and proved that profitability and ethical stewardship could coexist harmoniously. The contrast between Emily's leadership and that of Marcus and Laura Anderson became increasingly apparent as time passed. While her siblings continued to struggle with entitlement, frustration, and reactive strategies, Emily demonstrated patience, foresight, and moral clarity. Every challenge she faced, whether legal, strategic, or operational, was met with thoughtful action rather than emotional reaction. Her consistency built confidence among employees, investors, and community partners, while the siblings' attempts at disruption increasingly isolated them and diminished their credibility. The effectiveness of principled leadership became evident not only in tangible results, but also in the culture and perception of Sterling Holdings as a whole. Emily's reforms extended to corporate governance. She restructured the board to include diverse perspectives, emphasizing ethical oversight and accountability. Decisions were made collaboratively, with a focus on transparency and stakeholder engagement. Internal auditing processes were strengthened to prevent misconduct, and employee feedback mechanisms were formalized to ensure concerns were addressed promptly. By embedding ethical practices into the company's framework, Emily created a self-sustaining system where integrity and responsibility became operational norms rather than optional considerations. Community engagement remained central to Emily's vision. She established partnerships with local organizations, funding initiatives that addressed food insecurity, access to health care, and educational disparities. Employee volunteer programs were introduced, enabling staff to contribute directly to projects that mattered to them. Emily understood that a company's success was inseparable from the well-being of its surrounding community, and she used Sterling Holdings' resources to create meaningful, lasting change. Her efforts fostered goodwill, strengthened relationships, and provided tangible benefits that extended beyond financial metrics. Financial performance under Emily's leadership remained robust, a testament to the efficacy of ethical and strategic management. Revenue streams were diversified, operational efficiencies optimized, and long-term investments prioritized. By combining financial acumen with ethical stewardship, Emily demonstrated that corporate responsibility was not a liability but a competitive advantage. Investors recognized the stability, transparency, and forward-thinking nature of her management, further solidifying Sterling Holdings' position in the market. Emily's leadership also inspired cultural change within the organization. Employees who had once felt undervalued or invisible now experienced recognition, empowerment, and support. A sense of shared purpose permeated the company, fostering collaboration and innovation. Morale improved, productivity increased, and the company's internal cohesion strengthened. Emily's ability to blend empathy with strategic thinking created an environment where ethical leadership and operational success reinforced each other, demonstrating that human-centered management could drive tangible results. As Sterling Holdings transformed, Emily remained grounded in her personal values. She maintained her modest lifestyle, prioritized her daughter's well-being, and approached challenges with humility and focus. This authenticity reinforced her credibility and inspired those around her. She never lost sight of the principles that had guided her since the diner encounter: empathy, integrity, and responsibility. By staying true to these values, she ensured that her leadership was not defined by wealth or status, but by the lasting positive impact she could create. The culmination of Emily's efforts became evident in the broader recognition of Sterling Holdings as a model corporation. Awards for ethical leadership, sustainability, and corporate social responsibility highlighted the company's transformation. Local communities benefited from improved infrastructure, educational programs, and social initiatives. Employees experienced tangible improvements in working conditions, professional growth, and overall morale. Emily's influence had reshaped the empire into a force for good, demonstrating the power of principled leadership on a grand scale. John Anderson, observing these developments from a distance, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had begun as a simple test of human character in a small diner had culminated in the transformation of one of the city's largest private empires. Emily had proven that integrity, empathy, and strategic thinking could coexist with financial success, leaving a legacy that reflected both moral and practical excellence. The empire he had built was now a reflection of human decency, ethical stewardship, and the enduring impact of a single act of kindness. As Emily Davis's influence over Sterling Holdings solidified, the ripple effects extended far beyond the company itself. Other businesses began to take notice of the extraordinary transformation she had achieved. Competitors, investors, and corporate analysts were intrigued by the remarkable combination of ethical leadership and sustained profitability. Traditionally, the corporate world had treated ethics and profit as opposing forces, assuming that the pursuit of one would necessarily compromise the other. Emily, through her thoughtful initiatives and principled approach, had proven that integrity, transparency, and social responsibility could coexist with operational efficiency and financial success. Her methods became a subject of discussion at business conferences, in trade publications, and in leadership seminars, inspiring executives to reconsider what leadership could mean in practice. Emily's reputation as an ethical, effective leader began to spread across the media. Articles in major business journals described the transformation at Sterling Holdings, highlighting how a single individual's character could influence the culture of an entire corporation. Television segments, podcasts, and interviews focused not only on the company's financial results but on the human-centered approach Emily had implemented. She became an emblem of responsible leadership, showing that profitability did not have to come at the expense of ethics or social impact. For employees and stakeholders, her success demonstrated that principled decisions could be both sustainable and profitable, offering a tangible model for companies seeking to balance business goals with moral accountability. The impact of Emily's leadership extended to industry standards and practices. Boards of directors at other companies began examining her policies on employee engagement, ethical oversight, and community initiatives. Some firms adopted similar mentorship programs, workplace wellness initiatives, and environmental sustainability projects, inspired by Sterling Holdings' success. Corporate responsibility officers reached out to Emily for guidance, eager to learn how to replicate her model in their own organizations. Her methods encouraged a shift from reactive philanthropy to proactive stewardship, demonstrating that social impact and long-term financial health could reinforce each other. In this way, Emily's influence began to shape the broader landscape of corporate governance. Investors, too, began to reevaluate their priorities. They saw that companies guided by ethical principles, transparent decision-making, and strong internal culture could outperform peers in both stability and growth. Emily's success challenged traditional investment assumptions that equated profit maximization with short-term gains at any cost. Analysts increasingly highlighted Sterling Holdings as a case study in sustainable management, emphasizing that a focus on human and social impact could protect against internal inefficiencies, reputational risk, and employee turnover. Investors began seeking companies that demonstrated similar principles, effectively creating a new benchmark for responsible corporate behavior. Emily's influence was also felt within the communities Sterling Holdings touched. The programs she had initiated, scholarships, local partnerships, environmental investments, began to yield tangible results, improving quality of life for thousands of people. Schools benefited from updated technology, after-school programs, and teacher training initiatives. Local nonprofits gained funding and mentorship, enhancing their ability to serve the community. Employees became active participants in these initiatives, volunteering time and expertise, which strengthened the connection between corporate resources and societal benefit. Emily's leadership created a virtuous cycle, demonstrating that corporate success could be measured not just in dollars, but in meaningful, measurable improvements to human lives. At industry conferences, Emily began to speak publicly about her philosophy of leadership. She emphasized the importance of character, ethical stewardship, and responsible decision-making, illustrating her points with concrete examples from Sterling Holdings. Executives, board members, and young professionals listened intently, often taking notes and engaging in discussions about practical implementation. Her speeches emphasized that leadership was not simply a matter of strategy or financial skill, but of moral clarity, empathy, and courage. Her insights resonated deeply with audiences who had long been skeptical of the compatibility of ethics and profit, igniting a movement toward more responsible, human-centered corporate management. Emily's example also influenced aspiring entrepreneurs. Startups began to adopt values-driven approaches, considering ethical implications and social impact alongside financial strategy. Mentorship programs, community partnerships, and transparent operations became more common in entrepreneurial circles, with founders citing Emily's model as inspiration. The narrative of a waitress turned billionaire who transformed a corporate empire through integrity and vision captured imaginations, showing that leadership grounded in ethics could create tangible, scalable outcomes. Young professionals were encouraged to prioritize character over opportunism, understanding that long-term success depended on trust, credibility, and principled action. Legislators and policymakers, observing the societal benefits generated by Emily's initiatives, began to explore ways to encourage similar practices more broadly. Her programs in education, workforce development, and environmental responsibility became examples of public-private collaboration that achieved measurable social outcomes. Local governments partnered with Sterling Holdings on initiatives that improved infrastructure, educational access, and community resources. Emily's work demonstrated that corporate leadership, when guided by ethics and vision, could complement public policy and create sustainable social benefits. Internally, Sterling Holdings continued to thrive as Emily's vision matured. Employee engagement reached record levels, productivity improved, and retention rates increased. The ethical corporate culture she established created an environment where employees were motivated not only by compensation but by pride in their work and alignment with the company's mission. Teams collaborated more effectively, sharing knowledge and ideas openly, and innovation flourished. Emily's insistence on integrity and accountability ensured that success was sustainable and that the company could weather challenges without compromising values. Emily also leveraged her position to advocate for systemic change within her industry. She participated in advisory panels, corporate ethics councils, and leadership forums, sharing insights from her experience and advocating for practices that promoted fairness, transparency, and social responsibility. Her influence extended beyond Sterling Holdings, inspiring executives, boards, and policymakers to reconsider long-held assumptions about corporate priorities. She emphasized that companies could and should use their resources to create positive societal impact without sacrificing financial sustainability. Over time, Sterling Holdings became a benchmark for corporate responsibility, a living example of what was possible when wealth and power were guided by ethical principles. Competitors, investors, and the public recognized that Emily's approach produced superior outcomes not only financially, but socially and culturally. The company's transformation demonstrated that a well-run, principled organization could influence the broader industry, set new standards for governance, and inspire a movement toward more human-centered, responsible business practices. John Anderson, observing the impact from afar, felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The experiment he had begun in a small Brooklyn diner testing human character through an act of kindness had blossomed into something far greater than he could have imagined. Emily's leadership had not only preserved his empire, but expanded its influence in ways that reflected his values and his vision. By choosing character over bloodline, he had ensured that his wealth and resources were a force for good, creating lasting benefits for employees, communities, and the broader society. With Sterling Holdings firmly under her leadership, Emily Davis turned her attention to long-term sustainability and institutionalizing the principles that had guided her from the beginning. She recognized that true transformation required more than short-term initiatives. It demanded structural changes that would embed ethical practices, accountability, and community responsibility into the company's DNA. Emily began by reviewing every department, assessing processes, culture, and decision-making frameworks. Her goal was clear: to ensure that ethical governance, employee empowerment, and social responsibility would persist regardless of personnel changes or future pressures from external stakeholders. Emily's first major initiative was the creation of a comprehensive ethics and governance framework. She established clear policies that outlined the company's expectations for leadership, employee conduct, and stakeholder engagement. These policies were not merely guidelines but actionable protocols embedded into performance evaluations, project approvals, and strategic planning processes. By codifying the values of transparency, accountability, and social responsibility, Emily ensured that Sterling Holdings would continue to operate according to her principles, even if leadership changed in the future. Training programs were introduced at all levels to familiarize employees with these standards and to provide practical tools for ethical decision making in daily operations. To reinforce these changes, Emily implemented a mentorship and leadership development program designed to cultivate principled leaders from within the company. High-potential employees were paired with seasoned executives who embodied ethical and strategic thinking, fostering a culture of guidance, accountability, and moral courage. This program emphasized the importance of integrity in leadership, encouraging participants to consider both financial and social outcomes in every decision. By nurturing talent with a strong ethical foundation, Emily created a pipeline of future leaders capable of sustaining her vision and reinforcing the company's values over decades to come. Emily also focused on institutionalizing community engagement. She formalized partnerships with schools, nonprofits, and local governments, creating long-term initiatives that would not depend on her personal involvement. Scholarship programs, workforce development, and local infrastructure projects were structured as enduring initiatives with measurable goals and ongoing evaluation. By designing these programs to operate independently, Emily ensured that Sterling Holdings would continue to contribute positively to society, extending her vision beyond her own tenure and solidifying the company's role as a responsible corporate citizen. Environmental sustainability was another cornerstone of Emily's long-term vision. She established a comprehensive sustainability policy that guided corporate operations, investments, and development projects. Renewable energy initiatives, waste reduction programs, and environmentally conscious building practices became standard, not optional. Employees were empowered to propose improvements, and regular audits ensured compliance and innovation. Emily understood that sustainability was not just a moral imperative, but also a strategic one. Responsible environmental practices could reduce costs, mitigate risks, and enhance the company's reputation, creating a long-term competitive advantage. Corporate transparency became a key priority under Emily's leadership. She implemented regular reporting mechanisms that allowed employees, shareholders, and stakeholders to track company performance in terms of financial, social, and environmental metrics. These reports were clear, detailed, and accessible, fostering trust and engagement. By combining transparency with accountability, Emily created a corporate environment in which ethical conduct and operational success were mutually reinforcing, ensuring that decision-makers at every level remained aligned with the company's mission and values. Emily's influence extended to shaping corporate culture in tangible ways. She introduced recognition programs that celebrated employees who demonstrated ethical leadership, community involvement, and innovative problem-solving. By rewarding behavior aligned with the company's values, she reinforced the importance of character alongside performance. Regular workshops, forums, and team-building exercises emphasized collaboration, empathy, and shared responsibility. Employees began to internalize these values, creating a self-sustaining culture in which ethical and responsible decision-making became instinctive, rather than enforced externally. To support these initiatives, Emily invested in technology and systems that allowed for real-time monitoring of ethical compliance, employee engagement, and project outcomes. Data-driven insights enabled proactive management, ensuring that potential issues could be addressed before they escalated. By integrating ethical considerations into operational systems, Emily created a framework in which responsible leadership was not only encouraged but systematically supported. The company's decision-making became more holistic, considering financial, social, and environmental impacts in equal measure. Mentorship programs were expanded beyond internal employees to include community leaders and young entrepreneurs. Emily established advisory boards that connected Sterling Holdings with local innovators and social impact organizations, fostering collaboration and shared learning. By creating networks that extended beyond the company, Emily reinforced the principle that corporate leadership carries responsibility not only to shareholders, but also to society. This approach elevated Sterling Holdings from a profitable enterprise to a model for ethical influence in business and community development. Emily's vision also included risk management aligned with ethical standards. She developed contingency plans for corporate crises, financial challenges, and public relations issues that prioritized integrity and transparency. Employees were trained to respond to ethical dilemmas thoughtfully and consistently, ensuring that the company's values would not be compromised during periods of stress or uncertainty. By anticipating potential challenges and embedding ethical responses into corporate protocols, Emily strengthened the resilience and credibility of Sterling Holdings. Board composition was adjusted to support this long-term vision. Emily selected directors who demonstrated both strategic acumen and a commitment to ethical leadership. Diversity in background, experience, and perspective became a priority, ensuring that decision-making would benefit from multiple viewpoints and reduce the risk of groupthink or unethical shortcuts. The board became a living reflection of Emily's principles, providing oversight that reinforced her values while supporting sustainable growth and innovation. Emily also prioritized succession planning. She identified potential future leaders within Sterling Holdings who shared her commitment to ethical management and social responsibility. Through structured development programs, mentorship, and exposure to decision-making processes, these individuals were prepared to assume key roles in the future. By planning for succession in this manner, Emily ensured that the company's mission and values would endure beyond her own tenure, institutionalizing a culture of integrity and purpose that would guide the enterprise for generations. Through these initiatives, Sterling Holdings became a benchmark for responsible corporate leadership. Its operations demonstrated that ethical principles, employee engagement, community impact, and financial performance were not mutually exclusive but mutually reinforcing. Emily's influence created a sustainable model for success, showing that principled leadership could shape long-term strategy, culture, and social impact. Other companies observing Sterling Holdings began to emulate her approach, recognizing the benefits of integrating ethics, sustainability, and human-centered decision-making into core business practices. John Anderson, reflecting on the company from a distance, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His experiment to identify true character through a small act of kindness had yielded far-reaching consequences. Emily Davis, once a waitress in a Brooklyn diner, had not only assumed control of his empire, but had transformed it into a model of ethical leadership, community responsibility, and sustainable corporate practice. The legacy he had entrusted to her extended beyond wealth. It was a living, growing embodiment of human decency and principled action, capable of influencing society for decades to come. Emily Davis's leadership at Sterling Holdings had become more than a local or national story. It was evolving into a global example of how principled, ethical governance could transform an empire and inspire entire industries. Her reputation for integrity, strategic thinking, and social responsibility spread rapidly through international business networks, attracting the attention of corporate leaders, investors, academics, and policymakers alike. Conferences and seminars invited her to speak on the integration of ethics into corporate strategy, and her insights began to influence thinking far beyond the company's immediate sphere. Emily's journey from a Brooklyn diner to the helm of a multinational enterprise became a case study in leadership programs, illustrating how character-driven decision-making could yield tangible results in both business and society. Global corporations, particularly those struggling with reputational crises or internal ethical lapses, began to look to Sterling Holdings as a benchmark. They examined Emily's approach to transparent governance, employee empowerment, and community engagement, recognizing that her model offered a blueprint for sustainable success. Boards of directors worldwide initiated reviews of their own structures, asking hard questions about accountability, diversity, and the integration of social and environmental responsibility into decision-making. Emily's influence was subtle yet pervasive. She had created a standard that encouraged companies to move beyond profit maximization as their sole metric and to embrace leadership that valued human capital and societal impact equally. Investors and financial analysts began to quantify the value of Emily's ethical model. Reports showed that companies adopting similar principles enjoyed improved employee retention, increased productivity, enhanced public trust, and greater resilience during market fluctuations. By measuring performance through both financial and social indicators, analysts demonstrated that ethical leadership was not a luxury but a strategic advantage. Emily's example inspired a shift in global investment strategies, with funds increasingly favoring organizations that incorporated environmental, social, and governance as principles into core operations. This trend reflected a growing recognition that long-term value creation depended on ethical stewardship as much as on revenue growth. Emily's influence also extended to emerging markets. where companies often faced challenges balancing profitability with social and environmental concerns. By sharing her strategies and frameworks at international forums, she provided actionable guidance for organizations seeking to improve governance, sustainability, and community impact. Workshops and advisory programs she participated in emphasized practical implementation, how to embed ethical decision-making into daily operations, measure outcomes, and cultivate a culture of responsibility across all levels of an organization. These lessons proved invaluable to businesses striving to navigate complex economic, social, and environmental challenges while maintaining credibility with stakeholders. In academia, Emily's leadership was widely studied. Business schools, ethics programs, and leadership courses used Sterling Holdings as a model for case studies. Students analyzed the company's evolution, the structural reforms Emily implemented, and the results of her community-oriented initiatives. Her approach sparked discussions on the role of character in leadership, the integration of ethics into corporate strategy, and the long-term benefits of socially responsible governance. Professors cited her methods as evidence that leadership grounded in integrity and empathy could produce measurable outcomes, influencing the next generation of executives and entrepreneurs to prioritize character alongside skill. Emily also embraced mentorship at a global scale. She established programs that connected aspiring leaders from diverse industries with experienced executives who embodied ethical leadership principles. Through these programs, she encouraged participants to internalize values such as empathy, transparency, accountability, and social responsibility. By empowering individuals to act with integrity and foresight, Emily amplified her influence, creating a ripple effect in which principled decision-making could propagate across continents. Leaders who participated in her mentorship programs carried these values back to their organizations, gradually transforming business culture on a worldwide level. Non-governmental organizations and policy groups took notice of Emily's approach as well. Her integration of corporate resources into social programs, educational initiatives, and sustainability projects demonstrated that private enterprises could contribute meaningfully to societal well-being. Governments and international agencies consulted her on public-private partnerships, seeking guidance on leveraging corporate influence to achieve social objectives. Emily's methods provided a model for collaboration that balanced profit with purpose, showing that business could be a force for positive change rather than merely a mechanism for wealth accumulation. As Sterling Holdings continued to thrive under Emily's leadership, other companies began to adopt similar practices voluntarily. Ethical audits, transparent reporting, employee engagement programs, and community investment initiatives became increasingly standard in major corporations. Emily's approach demonstrated that sustainability, ethics, and profitability were mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. Companies that embraced her principles not only improved internal operations, but also strengthened their reputations, mitigated risk, and built long-term resilience. The corporate world was beginning to recognize that leadership guided by character could outperform conventional models driven purely by competition and profit. Emily also used her platform to address global challenges more directly. She funded initiatives in education, healthcare access, and environmental conservation in multiple countries, ensuring that Sterling Holdings' influence extended beyond the United States. She collaborated with international organizations to provide strategic guidance, funding, and technical support, aligning corporate initiatives with broader societal goals. By bridging the gap between business and social impact, Emily demonstrated that a single principled leader could influence both economic systems and human well-being on a global scale. Media coverage amplified Emily's influence. International outlets reported on Sterling Holdings' innovative programs, highlighting both the tangible results and the philosophy behind them. Articles, interviews, and documentaries explored the contrast between Emily's character-driven leadership and traditional corporate models, inspiring audiences to reconsider what effective leadership looked like. Public perception shifted. Leaders were increasingly expected to balance profitability with integrity, transparency, and social responsibility. Emily had inadvertently set a new standard for what it meant to run a corporation ethically and successfully. Through these global efforts, Emily's legacy began to extend beyond her own tenure. She institutionalized practices that encouraged sustainable growth, principled decision-making, and positive social impact. Programs she initiated were designed to continue independently of her personal oversight, ensuring that ethical governance became embedded into Sterling Holdings' organizational structure. Leadership succession planning emphasized character and values, guaranteeing that future executives would continue her approach. By structuring her influence to be enduring, Emily ensured that the transformation she initiated could serve as a long-lasting model for corporate leadership worldwide. In sum, Emily Davis' work transformed Sterling Holdings into a global exemplar of ethical, principled leadership. Her influence reshaped corporate culture, inspired emerging leaders, guided policy and public-private partnerships, and encouraged global adoption of socially responsible practices. What began as an act of kindness in a small Brooklyn diner had rippled outward, proving that character, integrity, and empathy could shape not only a single corporation but also industries, communities, and society at large. Emily's leadership demonstrated that true legacy was measured not merely by wealth or power, but by the enduring positive impact one could create for people, communities, and the world. Years after Emily Davis assumed control of Sterling Holdings, her influence had become deeply ingrained not only within the company, but across the broader world of business and society. What had begun as a personal experiment by John Anderson had evolved into a movement demonstrating the transformative power of character, empathy, and integrity. The company she led was now more than an empire of financial success. It had become a living testament to the principle that wealth, when guided by moral responsibility, could generate lasting societal good. Emily's example showed that true leadership required more than skill, ambition, or lineage. It required vision aligned with ethical action. Reflecting on her journey, Emily often thought back to that rainy evening in the Brooklyn diner, where her simple act of kindness had set everything in motion. She had been unaware that a billionaire, disguised as a stranger, had been observing her, testing her character. At the time, she had only intended to do what was right, offer respect, empathy, and care to a human being in need. That single choice had become the foundation for an entire legacy. Emily's life, and the lives of countless others, had been shaped by the authenticity and integrity she had displayed in small, unassuming ways. The story of her rise reminded the world that the values we uphold in ordinary moments can echo far beyond our immediate perception. Sterling Holdings continued to thrive as a global exemplar of ethical business practice. Emily had institutionalized the principles of transparency, accountability, and social responsibility, ensuring that the company's culture could not easily be swayed by external pressures or opportunistic actors. Leadership succession plans emphasized character, integrity, and empathy as primary criteria. Programs for employee development, mentorship, and community engagement were embedded into the company's operations, guaranteeing that ethical leadership would persist for generations. Emily had created a corporate environment where moral courage was rewarded, where long-term responsibility was prioritized over short-term gain, and where human dignity was central to every decision. The impact of Emily's leadership extended far beyond the walls of Sterling Holdings. Other companies began to model themselves after her approach, adopting frameworks for ethical governance, environmental sustainability, and social responsibility. Boardrooms around the world began to reevaluate what it meant to lead, asking questions about character, empathy, and long-term societal impact. Investors increasingly recognized the value of principled management, understanding that companies guided by integrity were not only morally commendable but also strategically resilient. The corporate world, once dominated by a relentless pursuit of profit, began to shift toward a new paradigm in which ethical leadership and financial success were complementary rather than opposing forces. Emily's initiatives in education, workforce development, and community support continued to bear fruit. Schools improved with better resources, technology, and training for teachers, enabling students to pursue opportunities previously unavailable to them. Scholarship programs empowered young people to attend college or vocational training without financial burden. Local nonprofits flourished with new funding and partnerships, amplifying their impact. By connecting the success of the corporation with meaningful social investment, Emily created a cycle in which prosperity and human flourishing reinforced each other. Communities became more resilient, cohesive, and empowered, reflecting the values she had institutionalized within the company. Her influence also reached aspiring leaders across the globe. Through mentorship programs, international speaking engagements, and leadership conferences, Emily emphasized the importance of ethical decision-making, empathy, and character. Young professionals learned that true success was not measured by personal wealth or status, but by the positive impact one could have on people, organizations, and society. Emily's life became a living curriculum in integrity, showing that the most profound changes often stem from consistent moral action, even in seemingly small moments. Her story inspired countless individuals to act with compassion, accountability, and courage in both their personal and professional lives. Over time, Emily began to focus on preserving the moral framework of Sterling Holdings for the future. She codified ethical policies, reporting mechanisms, and decision-making processes so that the company's culture could survive transitions in leadership. Employees were trained in ethical practices, not just compliance, emphasizing moral reasoning, transparency, and accountability in all operations. By embedding these values deeply into organizational structure, Emily ensured that Sterling Holdings would continue to operate with integrity, even when she was no longer actively involved. Her work demonstrated that sustainability was as much about moral consistency as it was about financial strategy. Emily's approach to wealth and leadership contrasted sharply with the actions of Marcus and Laura Anderson, whose entitlement-driven strategies had ultimately failed. Their repeated attempts to reclaim control of Sterling Holdings had highlighted the limitations of greed and self-interest when faced with principled governance. Their failures served as a cautionary tale, reinforcing the lesson that inheritance or opportunity alone was insufficient. The ability to wield power responsibly depended on character, foresight, and ethical judgment. In this context, Emily's success was not merely personal but emblematic of a broader truth about leadership and the distribution of resources in society. The public perception of Emily evolved into that of a transformative leader. Media outlets chronicled the story of her rise, emphasizing the moral lessons behind her achievements. Documentaries, articles, and case studies celebrated her combination of humility, wisdom, and strategic insight. People admired her not only for managing a vast fortune but for her ability to wield influence responsibly, shaping a corporation and society in ways that honored ethical principles. Her example reinforced the idea that wealth could serve as a tool for positive change rather than merely a symbol of status or power. Emily's legacy was felt most profoundly in the lives of those directly impacted by her leadership. Employees who had once felt overlooked now thrived in an environment that encouraged their growth, ideas, and ethical engagement. Communities that had been underserved now had access to education, healthcare, and resources that empowered generations. Young leaders who had been mentored under her programs were entering positions of responsibility with a foundation rooted in character and accountability. The empire she had inherited became a conduit for lasting social good, demonstrating that responsible leadership could extend far beyond the boundaries of the company itself. Even in her personal reflections, Emily recognized the journey's significance. From the moment she offered a simple act of kindness in a diner, she had been tested in ways she could never have anticipated. Each challenge, whether legal, operational, or societal, had reinforced the importance of moral clarity, empathy, and principled action. Her rise demonstrated that leadership was not defined by wealth, lineage, or ambition alone, but by the choices one made in critical moments, decisions that could influence not just a single organization, but entire communities and industries. In the final analysis, Emily Davis's story was more than a tale of personal success. It was a testament to the power of character, the value of ethical leadership, and the enduring impact of principled action. She had transformed Sterling Holdings into a beacon of responsible corporate governance, influenced global business practices, empowered communities, and inspired generations of leaders. Her legacy demonstrated that wealth, when entrusted and wielded with integrity, could become a force for profound, lasting good. What began with a simple act of kindness had become a blueprint for ethical leadership, proving that character, empathy, and responsibility were the greatest legacies one could leave behind. The story of Emily Davis and John Anderson provides profound insights into the nature of wealth, character, and legacy. At its core, it demonstrates that true value is not measured in financial assets, titles, or inherited power, but in the choices people make when no one is watching, when recognition and reward are absent. John Anderson's decision to test the character of those around him, and ultimately entrust his empire to Emily, a complete stranger who demonstrated genuine kindness, serves as a powerful reminder that integrity and empathy are the cornerstones of a meaningful life. The narrative challenges conventional assumptions about inheritance, success, and the distribution of wealth, illustrating that character should guide decisions with far greater weight than mere familial or societal expectations. One of the clearest lessons from the story is the importance of recognizing and valuing human decency. Emily's simple, uncalculated acts of kindness were the measure of her worth, revealing a moral compass that John's children, blinded by entitlement, failed to display. This underscores the principle that ethical behavior is often revealed in ordinary circumstances, not in grand gestures or formal recognition. The story teaches that the capacity to act with empathy, patience, and moral courage is a rare and invaluable quality, one that can transform not only individual lives but entire organizations and communities. True leadership, the story suggests, is rooted in understanding the needs and dignity of others, and in prioritizing ethical action over personal gain. Another lesson centers on the use of wealth as a force for good. John Anderson accumulated immense power and resources, yet it was his conscious choice to align these assets with ethical principles that created lasting impact. By entrusting Emily, he ensured that his fortune would not merely circulate among the entitled, but would serve as a tool to uplift people, improve communities, and set a new standard for leadership. The story emphasizes that wealth, when wielded responsibly, carries the potential to amplify human decency, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond immediate beneficiaries. Conversely, it demonstrates that resources in the hands of those lacking integrity can perpetuate greed, corruption, and harm, no matter the size of the fortune. The narrative also illustrates the transformative power of principled leadership in organizations. Emily's rise from waitress to corporate leader highlights that skill, intelligence, and diligence, while necessary, are insufficient without ethical grounding. She succeeded not merely because of competence but because she consistently acted with honesty, fairness, and foresight. Her approach reshaped Sterling Holdings' internal culture, strengthened employee morale, and enhanced community impact, proving that leadership guided by character creates sustainable success. The story thereby suggests that corporate, organizational, or societal change is most effective when driven by values, ethics, and empathy rather than by fear, greed, or hierarchy alone. Equally important is the lesson about resilience and humility. Emily never sought recognition or power. She performed her duties diligently, focused on doing what was right. Her humility allowed her to make ethical decisions without being swayed by external pressures, social expectations, or intimidation from those who challenged her. This demonstrates that leadership and influence require not only courage but also the ability to remain grounded and principled in the face of adversity. The story teaches that moral clarity and self-awareness empower individuals to navigate complex challenges while maintaining integrity, and that humility is a powerful tool for enduring impact and authentic influence. The story also critiques entitlement and the assumptions that often accompany inherited wealth. John's children, Marcus and Laura, expected access to power and fortune simply because of familial connection, yet their behavior revealed a lack of empathy, foresight, and ethical judgment. Their repeated failures to act responsibly highlight the dangers of privilege without moral grounding. By contrast, Emily's merit-based rise, founded on character rather than lineage, underscores that leadership and responsibility are earned through action, choices, and ethical consistency. This reinforces a broader societal lesson: access or opportunity alone does not guarantee positive impact. Integrity and moral discernment are essential to transforming potential into genuine contribution. Furthermore, the story provides insight into the long-term consequences of ethical versus unethical decision-making. Emily's principled actions created ripples that extended beyond Sterling Holdings, influencing industry standards, corporate culture, community engagement, and global practices. By prioritizing ethics, sustainability, and social responsibility, she demonstrated that positive decisions compound over time, yielding outcomes that benefit countless people and institutions. Conversely, the narrative shows that decisions driven by greed, entitlement, or short-term gain can generate disruption, conflict, and harm, demonstrating the enduring consequences of moral choices in both personal and professional contexts. Finally, the story emphasizes the idea that true legacy is measured not by wealth or power, but by the positive impact one leaves on people, organizations, and society. John Anderson's decision to entrust Emily reflects a recognition that character and ethics define lasting influence. Emily's subsequent actions transformed a corporate empire into a model of principled leadership, community responsibility, and sustainable success. The moral of the story, therefore, extends beyond the specifics of inheritance or corporate management. It is a universal principle that the choices we make, guided by empathy, integrity, and foresight, shape the world long after we are gone. In conclusion, the story of Emily Davis and John Anderson offers a multi-layered set of lessons. It underscores the importance of moral character, empathy, and principled leadership. It demonstrates the responsible use of wealth as a tool for positive change, the enduring power of humility, and the risks of entitlement without integrity. It highlights the transformative potential of ethical decision-making within organizations, industries, and communities. Most importantly, it conveys that true legacy is defined not by money or status, but by the enduring impact one has on others, on society as a whole. By internalizing these lessons, readers are reminded that the foundation of meaningful success lies in the choices we make, the values we uphold, and the ways we extend kindness, responsibility, and integrity into the world. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.